Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining and dialing in this lunchtime. I'm Gaby Hornsby. I look after seasons and campaigns for BBC Factual, and that includes the Our Planet Now environmental banner. And I'm also the sustainability lead for TV at the BBC. So you may have seen in the news yesterday that 2020 is on track to be one of the 3 warmest years on record, and the past decade has been the hottest in human history. So climate change is here and it's happening. It's no longer some far off distant event, but as David Attenborough himself has said, we have a window of opportunity to do something about it, and all is not lost. So can TV help us seize the moment and save planet Earth? To help answer that question, we have an illustrious panel here today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. There's Aaron Matthews, who is Head of Industry Sustainability at BAFTA, trying to corral broadcasters into helping the environment, particularly off screen, but increasingly engaging with what we're doing on screen as well. Liz Bonnin, broadcaster, whose back catalogue includes such impactful films as Drowning in Plastic and Meet Planet Earth, as well as the podcast, What Planet Are We On, which was launched recently. We've got Phil Holdgate, who is Senior Project Manager for ITV Studios, which is ITV's production arm. He's leading the sustainable production strategy for the company and trying to fulfill their ambition to get to net zero by 2030, no less. And finally, there's Tom McDonald, who is head of BBC Studios Factual, previously head of Natural History and Specialist Factual Commissioning at the BBC, where he was responsible for commissioning series such as Planet Earth, 7 Worlds, 1 Planet, and of course, Blue Planet 2. So thank you all for joining. There'll be a question and answer session at the end of the panel discussion. So for those of you watching, if you do have questions that you'd like to put to the panelists, then pop them in the Q&A box and we'll come to you at the end of the session. So just to kick off, everyone, a sort of easy starter, hopefully. How did you get into TV and what does your current role actually involve? I've given the job titles, but what is it that you do during the day? So Liz, I'll kick off with you.
Well, during the day at the moment, not as much as I normally do, that's for sure, but I studied biochemistry as my undergrad, and then I did a master's in wild animal biology quite a few years later. And in between those 2 degrees, I fell into television and presented entertainment TV for a while, which really ignited a passion for storytelling, so that by the time I finished my master's, I was curious about the possibility of communicating my passion, which is science and the natural world and how we can protect it. And the timing was perfect because just as I finished my master's, the BBC were starting up a new science magazine show called Bang Goes the Theory. And that was very much my training ground for about 7 years about how to reach as wide an audience as possible with all sorts of different science subjects. And I've been working in science and natural history programming now for about 12 years.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. How about you, Phil?
Hiya, Gaby. I got into TV as a trainee in my teenage years, straight out of A-levels, and started what was then Yorkshire Television. I'm showing my age a little bit there. But that company then went on to become part of the big wider One ITV group that we've got today. I was a trainee production accountant, so my background is actually production finance, which is a slight detour to sustainable productions. Got into sustainability actually through doing some business cases for some new technology for these new things called iPads that were coming out, and we did some number crunching, but I was really keen to emphasize actually this is a good idea all around for a whole host of things, because A, it makes us more efficient, but actually it's good for the planet. And that was a light bulb moment. I was like, oh, I want to do more of this. And over the past few years, got more and more into sustainable production to a point where I'm the sort of project lead for sustainable productions in the UK. You just alluded there to ITV's core strategy as well, which is quite ambitious, but we believe is achievable. So we're just looking now as to what dedicated resource that we can put into that and what's required to actually deliver it. So I'm sitting behind some of the strategy and the implementation planning for that, but working really close with editorial and production teams as well. So the ones that have got to do it, it's everyone's job, not just mine.
Great, thank you, Phil. How about you, Tom?
So I went into TV, sort of fell into TV is probably the right phrase, straight out of university. I mean, my TV career until I joined commissioning was not science and natural history. It was sort of a broad range of factual though. And then I joined commissioning in 2012 and then very quickly focused on science and natural history. Now I oversee BBC Studios Productions Factual division. So I oversee the natural history unit, the science unit, and the documentary unit.
Fantastic. And how about you, Aaron? How did you get into the business?
Hi, Gaby. I started in film, actually. So a lot of the big US funded films have an environmental coordinator on set. So I was doing that job on a couple of big Warner Brothers productions and then made the jump over to the BBC. And in terms of my everyday, it's really varied, which is quite nice. I guess at the start of the year, we had a discussion with Prince William and some senior broadcasters, but other times I'm looking at the carbon factors for our carbon calculator. And a couple of weeks ago, we were chairing a debate within the House of Lords, virtually, of course, about the role of broadcasters and Ofcom and producers in the context of a climate emergency. So quite varied, really.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. So sort of to get more into the meat of the conversation, then Tom, Blue Planet 2 obviously had a huge impact and felt like a bit of a game changer. And there was an amazing synergy between a problem that was highlighted on screen, but also NGOs having done a huge amount of groundwork. So when the public's sort of concern was ignited, there was a whole load of activity sort of ready and primed to go around it. Liz followed up with drowning in plastic. What do you think could be the next wake-up call? Could you repeat that sort of magic combination again, do you think?
And I think the first thing to say is people often talk to me about Blue Planet 2 as though the BBC hadn't covered in a meaningful way big environmental stories before. And we had, you know, not just me, but my predecessors. I think what was so striking to me was that it felt like, in fact, Planet Earth 2, which was the year before, did some big environmental stories, and I think they had less impact. And I think it's still sort of interesting to me that sort of the plastic story, if you like, sort of was the thing that really took off. And I think part of that is probably that sense of there's a direct relationship between our behavior as a sort of viewer and consumer and the impact that it has on the environment. So if we're sort of thinking about magic tricks, and I think there are no magic tricks, but sort of as a producer / commissioner, sort of sitting with thinking about both roles that I've played, I think for an audience, it always has more impact if they understand the direct relationship that they have with the story that you're telling. Now, sometimes that impact is as simple as you drink water out of a plastic bottle, that plastic bottle's discarded, it ends up in the oceans. Sometimes it's a slightly more roundabout way of saying, you know, the way that you live your life actually is having an impact on biodiversity. It may look like you're not having an impact, but you are having an impact. I mean, I think what's definitely changed in the sort of grammar of television, I think and in fact, I sat on panels 3 or 4 years ago, and I would have said that Planet Earth 2 is the best way to tell those stories, that you draw people in through awe and wonder, visual splendor, incredible storytelling, and then you hit them with the strong environmental message. I still think that's a really powerful way of delivering an environmental story. But I think what a film like Liz's Drowning in Plastic film did, or the Meat film did, or this year, the Attenborough Extinction the Facts film did, is that actually we're no longer in a moment where you have to, in inverted commas, sweeten the pill. And so I thought Climate Change the Facts and Extinction the Facts were, in their own ways, game-changing in a very different way. They were sort of unvarnished films which were there to sort of go, listen, you know, sort of wake up, listen. And I find it really striking and sort of incredibly heartening that Extinction the Facts was watched by, I think, close to 5 million viewers, 5 million consolidated viewers. And that doesn't include sort of all the long tail of iPlayer since then. So I think that's kind of extraordinary. You know, if you'd asked me 3 years ago how many people will come to a film called Extinction the Facts, even with David Attenborough, I would have not said 5 million. So I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's a sort of, can you pull off the Blue Planet 2 trick again? what I do know in terms of our sort of forthcoming portfolio is I hope that we're returning to Frozen Planet and doing another series of Frozen Planet. I think what that has to say about the polls is pretty frightening. And even for somebody who's pretty cognizant of the issues, it's, you know, what I'm hearing and seeing and viewing is chilling for me. So that I think will have a massive impact. I think the other thing that's really interesting is how the policies of governments and has a direct impact. So I'm thinking quite a lot about sort of the environmental impact that the last 4 years of the American government has had, thinking a lot about, you know, the impact of what's happening in Brazil. So how you find ways of telling those stories in a documentary way, which are still gripping. Anyway, I've garbled. I don't think there's a magic bullet, but I think what's exciting is that broadcasters and producers are thinking about multiple ways in which you tell the environmental story. There isn't just one way of telling it. Thank you, I'll be quiet now.
Well, that's great. And also I think what you've highlighted is the audience appetite for it. And I think the audience that we're engaging with is in a completely different place now than they were 5 years ago, for example.
Yeah.
But I mean, Liz, Tom there referenced about what he's seeing in the footage coming back from Frozen Planet. As you've been making films over this period of time, then what have you seen while you've been shooting sort of the impact of climate change? And how has that sort of inspired or disheartened you as a filmmaker?
It's done both, for sure, as a human being, and also then as a communicator with respect to our responsibility as an industry as well, to change the way we do things. Like every industry has to consider now very seriously. I suppose the most hard-hitting one of late is the Great Barrier Reef and what's happening to our coral reefs around the world. I think we all know that climate change is causing the bleaching of corals, but we stand to lose 90% of the global coral reefs by 2030, virtually all of them by 2050. And scientists say that we're about at 1 degree C over pre-industrial times now. If we hit 1.5, all coral reefs will disappear. And I think we also know that some of the targets are saying basically we're heading for 2 degrees above pre-industrial time. So it's quite disheartening information to see firsthand as well what's happening to the reefs that were once, you know, such a rich biodiverse life support system for all marine life, and what's happening to it. And then what's heartening on the other side of it, I suppose, is seeing, well, first of all, what can be quite disheartening too is the fact that coral reefs and all natural ecosystems are responsible for so much more than we imagine. We think they're, you know, incredibly beautiful places that harbor life, but actually, the more we research the planet, the more we understand how much of a role each ecosystem plays in our health and our future. So with that comes a stark realization of just how much we're impacting these ecosystems, which will in turn not be able to support us on this planet. So all of that can be quite, very powerful and hard-hitting information to not only learn, but then try to convey to as broad an audience as possible on television. So there's a huge responsibility in that, and there's a lot of consideration that goes into how hard-hitting is too hard-hitting. But as Tom mentioned, and as you mentioned as well, Gaby, you know, our audience are now really sitting up and paying attention and wanting to know what part they can play. So then the other side of the coin, I suppose, is the positive, isn't it? It's about, first of all, the incredible scientists who are doing extraordinary research to figure out how to protect ecosystems like our coral reefs, and how that can be so inspiring to every single one of us. But I think as well as program makers now, the other part of the solutions that we give and the positivity and the hope that comes through the action of scientists and individuals is how to give every single viewer the tools to empower them to be part of the solution as well. Every single person, whether it's a friend of mine or somebody I meet on the street who's interested in, you know, our environmental issues, says, I feel really disempowered. I want to be able to help. Please make programs that tell me what to do. So I think it's also a very exciting time. I don't think we have to shy away from, being as hard-hitting as we need to be with regards to the ecological crisis we're in. But I think we're also armed with so many really hopeful, inspiring, and positive actions that we can communicate to our viewers as well. And I'm excited about that aspect of the programs that we make as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And thanks, Dan, for sharing that photo of Liz out on location. Is that you on the Barrier Reef?
That's me rehearsing for Blue Planet Live last year, yeah.
Out in the oceans, thank you. So, I mean, as both Liz and Tom have indicated, then factual programming has a huge role to play here, and can do an amazing job on the topic. But should the environment just be the preserve of factual, or does it have a role to play across multiple genres? I mean, I think initiatives from the BBC, ITV, Sky, and UK TV have all focused recently on embedding sustainability into programming in general, rather than just our factual output. Aaron, do you think that that's important in terms of reaching a broader audience and sort of speaking to those beyond the, you know, the already converted, so to speak?
I mean, for sure. I mean, it's definitely, it has a, you know, comedy and drama have a role too. But, you know, as Tom and Liz will know better than me, you know, factual is a pretty plural genre. You know, specialist factual is entirely different to factual entertainment. And what specialist factual can do is kind of ensure that the public, the figures and the facts are in the public domain, whereas factual entertainment can help aspirationalize essentially, and make sustainability feel exciting. And it's the other more scripted genres that can have a really powerful role too, in just helping people understand and navigate the issue and understand their place in it. And well, kind of, it's easier to connect to more scripted genres, I think. You know, at Albert, we take the view that every piece of content really can be environmental content. It doesn't have to come with a solution or with a problem. But subtly, it can either reinforce or enforce the reality about whether we need to factor climate change into our decision-making processes. So that can be, you know, factual entertainment when we're helping people to move homes. It can be cooking shows where we're helping people understand what to cook, or you know, continuing drama where we're seeing kind of conflicts between generations, and it's really easy to see how that plays out in you know, climate change and what society's doing. So yeah, I think, you know, natural history has done an incredible job to sound the alarm, but if we're seeing contradictions to those recommendations in other genres, then we're not putting a kind of cohesive message to all our audiences, and certainly different genres can take that message in different directions.
And I mean, how is TV doing so far in terms of engaging with the environment more generally across its content? I mean, you've recently done a project, Subtitles to Save the World. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's achieved? And I'm going to say we have a off-screen fantastic coordinator, Danielle, who can bring up a slide, I think, to show us some of those results.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that this slide answers the question, how well are TV doing? Because what it does show is indicate, oh, it's been cropped a little bit, so you've missed out the key bits, but never mind. It does show how often the TV industry is talking about climate change. So we did this exercise last year, and we did it again this year, and we're just about to do it again next year. So in 2018, we saw that climate change was mentioned 3,000 times by BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky put together across their entertainment, comedy, drama and factual output. Now 3,000 times was the same number as urine and zombies and rhubarb. Moving forward to the next year, climate change has increased, and we now spoke about it 13,000 times, which is the same number as rat urine and poo, urine, not poo. I'm getting my things confused here.
Getting your years confused.
Sorry, this year was the same as nonsense and poo. But this is a silly way to kind of shine a light on an issue, to the fact that we're not really integrating climate change across all of our content. What's not shown on this slide is a perhaps more worrying reality, is that where we're actively pushing in the other direction. So we know that across the broadcast industry, we're promoting eating beef 3 times more than we're even talking about climate change. We're in our you know, recipes and in our for cooking shows. We also know we're talking about flying twice as much as we're talking about climate change. Now, I think it's important to mirror the science here and not say that this is a kind of green utopia that we expect people to live in. The Committee on Climate Change says we need to reduce our meat and dairy intake by just 20%. That's arguably very achievable, but when we can see these results, we see that we're not factoring climate change, and we're also pushing in the other way. But certainly the direction of travel is a positive one, right? A 4-fold increase from 2018 to 2019. 2020 has been an extraordinary year for communications around the planet, and we've seen how, you know, in continuing drama for everything else that that everyone's picking up the challenge, but certainly we've got some distance to go.
Indeed. Well, and apologies there for some technical confusion over the slides, but everyone, now you can see Aaron's slide in all its glory, and you can see that climate change is a little circle on the left-hand side and much smaller than cake, which is clearly very important, but not necessarily quite as important as climate change. But thank you, Aaron, for sharing some of those results. I mean, I think what you say really goes to the heart of the matter, which is how much do the stories we tell matter? You know, how much does it matter what we represent on TV? What sort of impact does that have? And if it does have an impact, then does it present TV with an ethical dilemma for us all as an industry about what we do across the board? And should we be doing more to save the planet? I mean, Tom, what do you think about that and incorporating sustainability beyond the sort of specialist output?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly true. It's interesting that Aaron mentioned continuing drama, because I think it's certainly true that not just in terms of environmental issues, but if you think about the power of continuing drama in British society, when I think about the amount of change that continuing drama has produced in terms of our attitudes towards sexuality, for example, or, you know, soaps do shift societal attitudes, and they take things that might feel like they're of sort of fringe interest or minority group interest, and they put them into the heart of the mainstream. And I think they've done that in the most extraordinary. I mean, I think they're really key. When I think about my mum and my granny, the truth is they're more likely to be thinking and provoked by EastEnders and Emmerdale and Coronation Street than they are by looking on the EPG and going, oh, it's a David Attenborough film. So I think, you know, a couple of interesting examples. So that I've been told about, that EastEnders in the CAF, they no longer serve bacon sandwiches anymore in the CAF. Now that I think is really interesting, because not only does it save various pigs' lives, so, you know, that bacon was a prop, but also it does do something interesting. EastEnders have done things like, there was a storyline last Christmas, which was around, you know, would Santa be able to come for Christmas if his home melted because of climate change? There have been characters who are trying to drive sustainability. You know, Aaron was talking about intergenerational things. So look, I think soaps are a really powerful vehicle for putting these issues into the mainstream. You know, I think Top Gear is another really good example of a show which on the face of it, you might go, isn't that the opposite of sort of what the Attenborough shows are doing, but just simply showing more electric cars, you know, making it look like being an electric car isn't just a worthy thing to do or an important thing to do, but is fun and exciting and energizing and all of those things. So look, I think it's really important. On the other hand, maybe this is a controversial view, I don't particularly want to watch Bake Off and be told about the ingredients of the cake and what they're doing for the environment. Look, I think it's really important that there is a sort of mixed ecology in television, and I think that's true of every big important issue. You don't expect it in every program. What I hope happens is the point where you almost don't notice that it's in programs, because it is so part of the fabric and the DNA. And, you know, and I think it's just as important, actually, not for me now to talk about, others I'm sure have strong views about it, is not just what you see on screen, but what as TV producers and broadcasters we're doing off screen as well. You know, sort of the impact that actually being in production has on the environment is just as important to me as sort of the message that you're delivering on screen.
Absolutely, and we are indeed going to talk a bit about footprint, our own footprint, and what we can do about that a bit later. And Phil, we're going to come and talk about soaps at ITV in a moment. But Liz, do you have any thoughts on that topic about sort of the importance of TV as a sort of modelling behaviour or normalising behaviour?
I think it's really interesting, what Tom's been talking about there, with respect to, will we get to a point where it's sort of not even noticed, that there's an element to what we're communicating, depending on the genre, that kind of has an intimate connection to how we live on this planet, and it's just sort of assumed. And I think, you know, I'm part of a specialist factual community that arguably, if we were doing life differently, would still be sort of, you know, niche for people who like to look at things, you know, and with respect to the natural world and how animals work and how the planet works. But we're at this point in our history where planetary health is this relatively new discipline, right? It's about a decade old, where finally we're not talking about ecological health, we're talking about human health is inextricably linked to the health of the planet. Indigenous people didn't forget it. So in a way, it's not a new discipline. It's just that we in the West have forgotten that everything we do affects the planet. So now we're in a position as communicators of this specialist factual genre where you know, part of this communication of, oh my God, did you know that absolutely everything is so interconnected, that this particular bug is vital for the air that we breathe, etc. And everything we do impacts, almost a domino effect, our life support system. So it's harrowing in one way, but it's also really exciting because it gives us a lot of fodder, and hopefully I'll be in employment for many years to come, because now not only are we looking at animals and going, isn't this little glass frog incredible, the way it, you know, it just sort of disappears onto the leaf and the wasps can't get it, and then it you know, karate kicks the wasps away to protect its eggs. That's a fantastic little animal. But now it's, oh my gosh, and because it exists and has evolved over millennia, it has a role that's so incredibly important to supporting us and our life on it. You know, it kind of is a whole new sort of area of awakening about how beautifully connected we are to everything. So it's fascinating and really, really exciting. So there's lots of programs to make about it, but also what it means, I hope, is that there's a huge transformation to, you know, waiting to take place, isn't there, about how we do life. And by that very nature, pardon the pun, it means that hopefully in the future, everything we do is just with this sort of unspoken respect for the planet that supports us. And we're just sort of mindfully, but not consciously, every minute of the day, just living in a way that reflects how, now that we know, it reflects that now we know how interconnected we all are, and isn't it just a beautiful place? Now I'm the one who's rambling, but you see what I mean? I'm just really excited about the fact that we're at a different stage in our history where, you know, our connection to the planet is so much more fascinating than we imagined. And I think for me, that gives us not only great material for the programs we're going to make, but also great hope for what lies ahead if we get things right.
If we get things right. I think Chris Packham said that we've had a period of behaving like teenagers and trashing the house. And now we needed to evolve into a slightly more responsible attitude, and yes, understanding that we need to look after where we're living a little bit more carefully. But Phil, we've talked about soaps and the role that they can play in terms of creating societal change. Can you tell us a bit about ITV soaps and Emmerdale and what's been happening on screen there?
Yeah, I think Tom sort of explained it really eloquently there, and I'm sort of backed it up as well. But it's such a powerful tool, is continuing drama, because of the reach, you know, it's maybe a different audience that might usually tune into, you know, natural history, current affairs, the news, etc. So you're broadening your reach by doing things to a different audience. But just the sheer volume, you're talking sort of 5, 6, 7 million viewers every single night, you know, across one channel or another. You know, that's a really powerful tool to reach out to people. And, you know, certainly across ITV and some of the examples that Tom gave there for EastEnders, it can be really subtle. And, you know, we talked a little bit today about normalizing good behavior. And I've been a huge champion of that for quite a while now. And it can be storyline driven. It can be how the characters act and behave, but some of the examples can be really quite subtle as well. And it encourages a new normal, which is pretty much what's going to be required for us to sort of try and tackle climate emergency. And some of the examples, I don't know if you've got the photo I sent over to you in advance, Gaby, but we've got one set in particular that is a great vehicle for it because it really fits in with that character. We've got David Shop, you know, relatively young guy. He's got a young family. You could imagine how the shop owner actually cares about the environment. And if you go into that set, it's absolutely fascinating. Some of it's quite subtle, but there's things like organic produce. It's local. We even put it on his van, which is an electric van. You know, you
see the charging point here in the photo, can't you?
Exactly that. And actually, that's been in the show for a couple of years now, where, you know, electric vehicles are coming, but they're not really mainstream just yet. So we've been quite ahead of the curve in both the soaps into that effect. Quite early doors, one of the first things we did was to remove carrier bags and replaced it with these renewable bags, which seems like a bit of a daft example to give, but we're talking a few years ago where, you know, there wasn't the 5p tax on carrier bags then. And we got the character to actually say it in the show, saying, no, I'm not doing that anymore. You have to bring your own bag, or you can buy one of these. Interestingly, for ITV, it's one of our best-selling little bits of merchandise now. Everybody wants a David's sort of shop bag, which is an additional benefit, if you like. But there's all sorts in there, you know, compostable cutlery, reusable coffee cups, anything and everything like that, where we can encourage people to just to see how things can be different. And actually, it's no big deal. It's just relatively subtle, and that ripples all the way through to, you know, taking the plastic straws off of the bar in the wool pack. To, you know, what do we serve on the menus? Some of it's quite minute detail, but some of it, you know, it builds up to a bigger picture. But you don't have to ram it down people's throats to achieve that either. It's quite subtle. So, you know, I think certain genres have a part to play by really sort of educating and informing, and other genres have got a huge part to play in saying, you know, actually you can do things differently, and it's not that scary. And I think continuing drama and soaps are at the forefront of that, because it's a window into somebody else's life, which is why I think they're so popular. So if we can show, you know, maybe how to live that life to the best of your abilities and in a way that isn't going to damage the planet, then that's a good thing. It's a really powerful tool.
Yes, and as Tom said, I think continuing soaps, so continuing drama, have been in the past hugely effective across sort of multiple fronts. And there's a really heartening story of change from America about a seatbelt, a designated driver campaign, which for those of on the audience maybe some time ago now, but we appeared in Cheers and the Cosby Show, and resulted in thousands and thousands and thousands of lives saved in America just by dropping in the idea of a designated driver to reduce drink driving deaths. So it's sort of a very, very powerful tool. But Liz, what do you think, you know, what is on your radar next about where we can really have impact?
I think I touched on it there with the whole planetary health discipline. I'm just really excited about that. I think for me, it feels like a game changer, how we can move forward by telling stories that by their very nature are going to inspire, because we're celebrating our interconnectedness with every living thing and every living system. And I just still think that, you know, thanks to the programming that's come before, I think we shouldn't be apologetic about continuing to convey the cold hard facts. But alongside it, there's a very exciting energy around our emerging deeper understanding of how the planet works and how much we rely on it for survival. I also still think that we need to showcase these incredible people who are working night and day as we go about our daily lives, imagining, creating solutions, really working hard to understand how every species in a particular ecosystem works and why it's necessary in order to protect it and to, you know, to better understand how to live alongside it. There are some really important human stories to tell, just from, you know, using these shining examples of, you know, who we can be at our best. So I have been quite depressed, in a way you could argue, in the last few years with respect to what I've learned about, you know, how we live on this planet and how we've gotten to this point, okay? Because I've started making more hard-hitting environmental documentaries. And then of course this pandemic hit, which is again connected to how we extract natural resources and degrade forests, so viruses have more of a chance to emerge and emerge into novel species like ourselves. And yet, weirdly, I've never been more excited about the potential for the change, that we're at the cusp of this transformation. And I'm really excited about being part of the community that shares those stories, because we have all the solutions. We have incredible leadership coming from not only the political realm, but all aspects of society. And for me, the greatest leaders are those scientists that are, you know, leading the way with vaccines and with solutions to all our environmental issues as well. So yeah, weirdly, I'm very excited about what's next with respect to the narrative, because of how close we are to getting it right, should we choose to. And
I mean, I think that we sort of touched on this a little bit in what we've talked about, but is there a difference between broadcasting and campaigning, and how do we navigate that as an industry? I mean, Tom, what do you think about that?
So, thanks, Gaby.
Put you on your mettle.
It's a really thorny issue, this, there isn't it? Because I think, look, the really straightforward part is delivering the science message. It is the really easy bit. So, you know, as you said right at the beginning of this presentation, you know, this session, the facts aren't contested, you know, and the more we understand about the planet and the more we understand about the interconnectedness, the more information there is to deliver. And there's new insight and learnings, as Liz has pointed out, all the time. So there's sort of almost this constantly replenishing set of information, because there are scientists all around the world doing extraordinary things. Where it gets really complicated is, you know, in the realm that Liz was talking about, which is the solutions, because the solutions are, unfortunately, political with a small p. You know, people dispute what the right and appropriate way to behave is. That I think it's really important to reflect the debate, you know, the debate and the discussion. And I also think, look, campaigning is a funny old word, isn't it? Because I think if you look at the things that Hugh Fenley-Whittingstall, for example, has done, are they campaigns? Well, I guess they have a sort of campaigning spirit, you know, that what I think television has the responsibility of doing. And I think there've been brilliant examples of this. Hugh's series, I think, are brilliant. You know, Jamie Oliver and School Dinners many years ago. You know, it is you show change in action. You offer people choices. You know, I don't think it's our job to go, you must do this, but I think it is our job to show change makers. And if you like, you know, Hugh Fenley-Whittingstall, his programs, Jamie in the past and his programs, they are change makers, and they inspire people to bring that change into their own lives. So I don't think it's a conflict, actually. I think Liz was talking about showing scientists on screen, letting scientists deliver things in their own voice. I think the more interesting bit is about how you engage heart as well as head. Do you know what I mean? Logically, I think people aren't going, oh, we shouldn't do anything. It's how you engage them, to how you galvanize in a way that doesn't feel like being told off.
Yeah, I think it's about finding solutions that make sense for people's everyday lives, isn't it? That it's an easy choice to make rather than a hard choice.
I think that's right. But also, you know, one of the really interesting things, there was a piece of research that was done, and I was really fascinated to read this because I didn't know whether it would be the case or not. But, you know, we live in the midst of a global pandemic, and for young people, climate change is still their number one issue. And I found that sort of quite heartening, because there was a part of me that was worried that, because of course there's absolutely an interconnectedness between what's happening in our world now with the global pandemic and all the environmental issues we're talking about. But I was slightly concerned that it would be falling down the agenda. That doesn't seem to be happening. And I think people understand that there is an interconnectedness. The pandemic is a sort of example of the world struggling with the amount of change that we've gone through.
Indeed. Well, there's so much to talk about on this topic, and we could go on, but I think it's important that we also acknowledge our responsibility to clean up our own backyard and what we do as program makers in terms of our own production footprint. I mean, Aaron, can you tell us sort of briefly a little bit about the Albert certification scheme and what that means for TV production?
Sure. I mean, it's been around about 5 years, and essentially it's just a glorified checklist to say, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? A number of things, whether it's hiring crew on location, using electric generators, battery power generators, or even carbon offsetting where you know no emissions are, you can't reduce them. So it's a level that production teams can aspire to, and every year we change those criteria based on the things, taking off the things that people are doing every day and including some new ones like the zero carbon generators that are being used quite a lot on scripted. And what they do really, yes, they do get some reductions from the productions itself, but it's almost what they do in the wider supply chain, which I think is more important, because when it comes down to productions, it's an entity that exists for 6-9 months. You know, I know it's longer for natural history and for some productions, but the idea that we can change a whole industry in the process of just 6 months is kind of bewildering when you think about the net zero ambition. So also what's really important in the certification is that we just empower productions to ask the right questions of their supply chain, because that's actually where our responsibility lies. We can't come up with the solutions right now, but by continually asking our post-production facilities where they're on renewable energy, asking our studios where they're on renewable energy, you know, these are the things that over time create the change. So the certification has that dual operation to celebrate the things that are within the production's gift to actually do something about, but also lead towards the larger change. The direction of travel for that, actually, we just put out a report a couple of weeks ago called Screen New Deal, which is around scripted productions, and it aims to articulate and explain and get people excited about what a zero waste, zero carbon filming future could look like. And it's so full of employment opportunities and new service opportunities. I think it's something to get really excited about, and it's the certification that's going to get us there. Because each production, and there's about 400 of them each year who do certification, are that army who are asking the supply chain of the right questions.
Great, and Phil, this is obviously your bread and butter, trying to push this through at ITV. Then what have you done, and how easy has it been, or how difficult? Because I think that there can be a nervousness that trying to be environmental, sustainable is going to cost time and money.
Yeah, I think certainly when I first started paying interest into this particular topic, and started working with the Albert team especially, and it really helped you understand what some of the challenges were. And I think there was a perception around cost, which is probably why they put a former accountant in control at ITV. But I'd argue till I'm blue in the face that essentially what we're telling people or asking people or expecting people to do is to be more efficient and avoid wasting. Now, whether that's wasting electricity or wasting your rubbish or wasting costumes or whatever that is, then if you're avoiding waste and being more efficient, then potentially you might well save some money as well. And I think where the conversation's starting to change is understanding, rather than cost, it's thinking about value. And actually, is it just a financial cost, or is there a carbon budget associated with something as well? But yeah, there's lots of activities we're working on at the minute, looking at things like low energy lighting for the soaps and for daytime and for news. These ongoing productions that might not be a huge impact on certain genres, but for productions like that, it's about a 90% saving in power requirements. So if you can put in an infrastructure change that helps you to adopt that new technology, the low energy lighting, then that's a hugely impactful thing to do. It's not a quick thing to do, and it's not a cheap thing to do, but it's on our roadmap, and we're already starting with that. And actually, we're well progressed with that. Current conversations at the minute are things like, and I'll come on to supply chain in a bit, but what can we do that we can directly affect? So, our offices, our studios, things like that, are they on renewable energy tariffs? And we've made a huge amount of progress in a relatively short period of time around that. I'll be interested to see if that then progresses to things like on-site renewables and storage as well, which should be potentially quite exciting. If I think back to where we were 5 years, then what's the next 5 years going to look like? Which is, it gets me a little giddy as a kipper thinking about it. And then it's things like, we've got about 200 vehicles across ITV. That's our fleet. So yeah, we do have a lot of productions that pop up and disappear. That's a different challenge, but we do have these ongoing productions that are supported by quite a large vehicle fleet. So a lot of thought at the minute is to, well, how can we decarbonize that? And some of these vehicles at the minute, yeah, they are more expensive, but if you take a look at the whole life cycle value of that particular part of the puzzle, then maybe we could do things a little bit differently and understand it differently to say, well, actually, it doesn't have to cost you much more. Is it a bit more carbon neutral than we think? Sorry, cost neutral than we think. But with this huge carbon saving, something about 450 tons of carbon every year if we could decarbonize our fleet. So there's some of the really big ticket items, but as Aaron says, you really need to be challenging your production team, do things differently, come up with suggestions, because a lot of people on the ground who are working day in, day out on productions, they're the ones who know it best. They know what the opportunities are. So how can you engage with people and really get them to come up with some of the solutions as well? So you can look at the big picture stuff, but you're really relying on, it's a collective effort. It's everyone's job to do. To be more sustainable, and collectively as an industry as well. If we can, most of us are using a big chunk of the same supply chain. So if we're all asking for the same things, that's how you're going to start to influence change, and that's really exciting as well. So a lot of collaboration, and yeah, like I say, it's everyone's job. It's not just a handful of us that need to be doing this.
That's great. And I think that's a really important point about it being the responsibility of the entire production team, because I think for lots of junior, new entrants who might be listening to this discussion, that idea that it's, it's down, from the runner upwards, it's, it's both those at entry level and those at the top, who all need to engage in a collective effort about how we can do things in a different way that can help the planet, but also can potentially save money in some aspects and have more money to spend on other things.
Yeah, potentially. And I don't think that's necessarily the driver for it. I think it's good to debunk some of the myth that it's a bit of an easy get out of jail free card. So it's too expensive, we can't afford it because we've got a really tight budget. Well, I'd challenge people on that, and it's difficult, I guess, as just to pick up on your point there about different levels of seniority within a production. It's difficult sometimes. If you're the new starter and this is how things are done, and you think, well, why am I drinking water out of a single-use plastic bottle and then just throwing it away and getting another one? That's crazy. So you should feel empowered to challenge people, because it's everyone's responsibility. But sometimes maybe that's a little bit more subtle, where you just turn up with your own water bottle and refill it yourself. It's quite a subtle thing to do, isn't it? So it doesn't matter where you are in that production or how senior you are or you feel you are. We've all got a part to play.
Fantastic. And I want to get to the questions from the audience soon. So this is just a very, very quick thought from you all about, if we're in 2030 and we're looking back and saying, what has TV achieved in the last 10 years, then what would you like to be able to say, Aaron?
It's got to be around a culture of optimism. We've tried to sell environmentalism about giving up and not doing things, and who on earth wants to come to that party? So of course we need to talk about the reality and the travesty of our world, but it's around the optimism for the solutions. I think we've already started, and I think it can only play out over the next 10 years. How
about you, Tom?
I guess I feel really optimistic. What I would like is for us to have all the world to have collectively moved on to the point where it feels like good and progress has been made. Things have happened. I think that optimism will come by these nudge changes in people's behaviors and that normalization. I think in some ways we've spent the last X years sounding alarms. I sort of hope we don't feel that we're still having to sound alarms in exactly the same way, because if we are doing that in 10 years, something's gone wrong. I think it means the alarm sounding wasn't that effective.
How about you, Liz?
I mirror both Aaron and Tom's thoughts. And to quote Greta Thunberg, with action, hope is everywhere, optimism is everywhere. So in 10 years time, wouldn't it be lovely to think that change happens in a ripple effect a lot of the time. Behavioral sciences is now working very hard at understanding how we as humans change and what propels that change. And a lot of it is, oh, you're doing it and it's working, okay, well, I'll have a go. The ripple effect that can take place through simply watching somebody else do it is the potential for that is huge. And so there are certain either industries or sectors of industries that I hope will just really stick their heads up above the parapet and lead by example, just do the bold, brave thing. I know finance is a whole other conversation, right? Or systemic issues that create obstacles to moving forward, and we need support from our governments when it comes to that. But ultimately, it's about those leaders in certain sectors that are just going to lead the charge, create that change, so that by 2030, we've all gotten to a certain point where we can literally sit back and go, look, we're nearly there. Or, oh, would you even imagine it? We did it. We've mitigated the increase in temperature. We're there. We've finally solved this. Wouldn't that be incredible? Just 10 years. We're in an ecological crisis. We literally do have 10 years. So let's do it.
And how about you, Phil? What do you want TV to achieve in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think sort of culture in general, but TV in particular, can communicate and engage with people like no other platform, is my sort of personal opinion. So if we can harness that and use that to really shape and influence culture in the country and beyond, I know a lot of the companies that operate in the UK operate around the world as well. And just to take a sort of Liz's point there, that ripple effect as well. So I think it's almost like an advocacy and a leadership role that TV has, I think, just to lead the way and show people what a new normal might and should and can and has to look like. So I think if I want to turn around in 10 years time, if we haven't done that, that's a massive failure on our part. But I think there's a really solid foundation for us to build on. some great stuff happening already, and it's a continuation of that, but maybe an acceleration of that as well. Because 10 years is the end point. The sooner we can get to that bit, the better. We don't want to leave it right to the end.
No, not no one to be the student staying up all night to finish the essay. But let's go to some questions from our audience. So Louise Osborne says, hi, do you believe there can be shows with an environmental narrative throughout? Entertainment can tell stories that make things popular, like the Queen's Gambit made chess really popular. Is there a way that we could have a Game of Thrones for the environment and ecological warriors? What do you think, Aaron?
I mean, there's the closest is, well, two examples from drama I know are a Dutch drama called Alge Dik en Brekken, I think, which is about when sea level rise, and it crucially led to policy change in the Netherlands because it was so well researched about the state of the dams and sea level rise that it caused policy change, and it was a public service drama. Also coming out of Brazil is a great telenovela around a family living through deforestation. So yeah, I think it absolutely can be, you know, on the nose and in drama, just as it can be on the nose in Factual, because it's out there.
When everyone, Gaby, when coronavirus happened, there was a moment where everybody seemed to be watching the film Contagion, you know, the Steven Soderbergh film Contagion. It was sort of slightly perverse. Everyone decided to watch Contagion. But I do think there's obviously been a rise in the book industry of sort of future tense environmental thrillers, which sort of project you forward to a world in which there's been sort of environmental collapse and devastation. I absolutely think there are sort of, it sounds like, I'm not going to try and do the title, Aaron, of that very good sounding series, but I think there are really smart ways. You know, sci-fi has always been a really interesting genre which has sort of looked at our future and our present in interesting ways. You know, you think about Handmaid's Tale is not exactly sci-fi, but sort of what that is sort of trying to say about democracy, America, women, etc., etc. And I think there'll be a rise in drama which does that sort of thriller meets environmental, whether it's set in the present or the future.
And I love now. We're seeing that, aren't we? We're seeing, you know, real environmental crime podcasts increasingly. So I think, you know, that's the direction travel has to be.
But I'm one of those people who's going to buy a chess set for Christmas.
And I mean, do you think that there's a way we could utilize talent more effectively in entertainment or factual entertainment around the environment? This is a question from Beth Crawford, where we've obviously got Liz and David Attenborough, who are doing a sort of Chris Packham, all doing a fantastic job in their genre. But what about the sort of more popular presenters like Ant and Dec? How about incorporating other names?
What do you mean? What do you think? More popular than Liz Bonnin? You say
not more popular, but I mean those other genres in the popular entertainment genres.
I mean, Liz, you should speak to this, because one of the things that I find really striking about your podcast is obviously your guest lineup, and I've not been involved in your podcast, but that's quite. I think that space of where you invite people to talk about the environment and not people you associate with the environment is really interesting. So I don't know how your producers or you chose your guest list for your podcast.
It was to reach as wide an audience as possible, and to not to preach the converted all the time as well. So we had Lily Cole, who works as an actress and is in the a fashion industry, but also is a fervent environmentalist now, and Idris Elba, who became a UN ambassador for agriculture in developing countries. So we were trying to do just what we're discussing, to really broaden the net with respect to the transformation that needs to happen. I mean, dare I say, Chris Packham has been very vocal about it, but I mean, I would love to engage, people like Ant and Dec, first and foremost, with them leading the charge. We're talking about leadership here in whatever sector you're in, by making some decisions about, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. And it's becoming more and more spoken about, and the kind of the ludicrousness of using animals and insects for that program. It's becoming we're at the cusp of that discomfort, I think, and it needs to be spoken about. We need to continue pushing that, because a lot of I've seen some viewers saying, I want to see more of the adventure exercises in the in the castle. I don't want to see animals anymore. So we're getting there. But wouldn't it be fantastic if Ant and Dec actually came on board and made that their kind of not campaign. We're not talking about campaigning here. We're talking about transforming the industry, and became sort of poster people for that. I think that would be a really good start for the two of them. And then I'd get them on the podcast.
Bill, there's a challenge to take back to ITV for you there. But we've also got some questions for sort of advice for more entry level. Someone's asked, what experience do you need to get involved in programs such as Blue Planet? Tom, what advice would you give for those starting out?
I mean, I think what's really interesting, and it's a really interesting moment, I think, for natural history program making, is I think it was for many, many years the domain of those people who had done science degrees at university. And I think it felt it was a sort of specialist genre. And of course, in terms of craft skills, it remains a specialist genre in terms of photography, editing, etc., etc. But I think more and more there's a sort of recognition that this is like other telly, that actually it's about storytelling and it's about engaging people. And so I'm a real believer that there should be no barrier to entry in terms of, you shouldn't have to have a degree in biology or environmental sciences, etc., in order to do it. There are loads of brilliant, there's a brilliant talent team inside the NHU. And I think that their details are on the BBC's website. So starting a conversation with the talent team inside the Natural History Unit would be a good place. What are you passionate about? Why are you passionate about it? I noticed on the Q&A list from people saying there aren't many entry-level jobs around at the moment. Well, actually, on one of the few things that we've managed to keep in production are things like Spring Watch, Autumn Watch. They're live shows with small teams that do have entry-level roles that are replenished every year. So much as I'm with Liz that we should celebrate specialist expertise with scientists, and that's a really important part of what it is, I also think we'll change the kinds of environmental programs we make if we invite generalists. I would say that I was a generalist into the fold. Do you know what I mean? So because that normalization is important. It can't feel like it's a niche subject. Contact the NH talent team is my short answer. Contact the NH
talent team.
Yeah.
Indeed. Now we've had quite a few questions about how we bring the environment into mainstream programming, which I think that we did talk about quite a bit in the discussion in the end. But we've got, I'm just trying to think, because we're out of not so much time, and who should we pick for this? So I've got a statement here saying it would be great if we could see one huge show on the climate emergency, covering a variety of different things that we all need to do as society, business, and the government. And it's shown by all the major broadcasters at the same time. People would have no choice but to watch it. I think that's a really interesting idea about cross-broadcaster collaboration on the topic, and whether there is scope for joined up behavior or joined up thinking. So Aaron, what would you have to say in response to that?
I guess I'd actually tie both those questions together about getting it in luxury and also tying up broadcasters, because what the broadcasters all have in common is that they're asking people to use certification. Now, next year, there's going to be a new question in certification, which is to ask all program makers to make sure editorially they're not normalizing unsustainable behavior. Now, we've never done that before, and that's echoed in the new BBC's ComSpecs as well. And it gives me great hope, because no one wants to be normalizing unsustainable behavior. It's just they haven't been asked the question, whether it's flying people to judges' houses or how to dress well. Just we haven't asked the producers that question. Are we making sure that we're moving in the right direction? So I think it's more about, that gives me great hope, and the broadcasters are all working on that together as well. There might be a moment around COP, but who knows, that we have to see what's going to be possible there.
I mean, I think COP sort of presents a challenge, doesn't it, to us all as broadcasters about what we do in response to that and how we want to engage with it. I think the BBC, which I can speak for about our plans much more than obviously than other broadcasters, but there's a big series that's been announced looking at the Earthshot Prize, which will be very solutions focused in the run up to COP, and hopefully have positive messages about change that is happening on the cusp and new innovation that can help us tackle some of the multiple challenges ahead in the next decades to come. But it's 3 minutes past 2, so although there are more questions and I could keep on talking to you all for some time on such a fascinating subject, then I'm going to wrap up and say thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you to all those who joined us for this conversation. And I hope it leaves you inspired about the opportunities ahead. And if you want to find out more about training opportunities and other information, you can always check out the article. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, Gaby.